A listener note: this story contains adult content and language.
God's gonna deal with my enemies, and boy, are they gonna get it. My daddy is gonna get them. Y'all feel that way? Yeah. My daddy's gonna get them.
It's Sunday morning, and the congregation of the Heart of Fire Church is listening to a fiery sermon about heaven and hell, worldly temptation, and the grace of Jesus. This is pretty typical here. Long, winding sermons, no breaks for music or hymns, a message of salvation. But there's one big difference: the person behind the pulpit. It's Rebecca Johnson. Her husband is dead.
Help me say it. I'm the blessed of the Lord. I am the blessed of the Lord.
You're listening to The Pope's Long Con from the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting in Louisville Public Media. I'm Jake Ryan. At the end of the last chapter, we knew the story wasn't over, but none of us knew just what would happen next. Here's R.G. Dunlop.
On December 11, 2017, we released a 10,000-word investigation detailing the life of Danny Ray Johnson, the man who called himself the Pope. We debunked claims he'd made about who he was and what he'd done. We exposed his lies and crimes, and we reported, for the first time, an allegation of sexual assault that a young woman made against Johnson in 2013. Johnson was a state representative for Bullitt County's 49th House District. By lunchtime the day the story published, both political parties had called for him to resign, and Louisville's mayor told the police department to review his handling of the sexual assault case, which we found was badly flawed. The next morning, Danny Ray Johnson held a press conference. He stood behind the church pulpit and led a handful of followers in a Christmas carol.
Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord.
Then he started talking.
All right, I want to answer questions if I can, and I want to make a statement.
The usually boisterous preacher wasn't himself. He was subdued and defensive.
People that run for office, hopefully, are just real people, and there's no perfect people. So there's going to be things, if you go through the time somebody was born, and that's what's happened in my life in this situation till this date, there's things that aren't perfect, and that's a fact.
He said Miranda Richmond, who had accused him of sexual assault, was troubled. He denied molesting her, and he blamed the current media climate for the issue even being raised.
I know that today in this climate that we live in America with politics, it seems as though everyone gets accusations, and I know that.
Johnson said he wouldn't resign, but he also didn't address any other specific findings from our investigation, such as why he claimed he was a White House chaplain, or a UN ambassador, or a 9/11 hero. Reporters focused instead on the alleged sexual assault and another finding of our investigation.
Have you ever raised the dead?
God has. Thank you.
The press conference lasted about 25 minutes. The whole time, family members and other supporters stood behind Johnson in a row. Rebecca Johnson was among them. Afterward, she talked to reporters herself.
People that want to do good and serve in office get treated like this. Nobody's good enough. It's horrible. And I hate it for our friends and family that have to go through this, and our constituents, because they're good people and they want a representative to represent their values. I get so mad about this.
At that point, it seemed possible there would be no lasting consequences for Danny Ray Johnson. He wasn't going to resign. He denied everything. But the day after his church press conference, he posted a disturbing message on Facebook.
Bullitt County Communication, Dispatcher Phillips.
Yes, I was calling. I was on Facebook, and I know this sounds stupid, but Dan Johnson, who is our representative and lives in Mount Washington, made a very public post, and it does appear like he's contemplating suicide. It's not a very veiled threat.
Rebecca Johnson would later describe that night for a local TV station.
He was there in the house with me, and I said, I had a migraine. I said, I'm going to go lay down. I got a migraine. And he came in and kind of just lay down beside me for a minute and cuddled me. And then I thought he got up to go put some wood. We had our fireplace going. And then I fell asleep, and I woke up, and I saw that message, and I just was like, oh, no, this isn't good. And I began to go look for him and ask my daughter, have you seen him? And I started calling people, you know, and telling them I was concerned and getting them to go look for him, and things went on from there.
The Bullitt County Coroner's report shows that Danny Ray Johnson shot himself in the head, not far from his home in an area known as the Salt River Bottoms. Miranda Richmond, the woman who'd accused Johnson of sexual assault, heard the news from her fiancé.
He came into the room and he said, were you not going to tell me that this happened? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, my mom just called me. She said that Dan Johnson killed himself. And I looked at him and I was like, no, that's not true. And I don't know if I just didn't believe it or if I didn't want to believe it. He was like, Mom, he was still on the phone with her. He said, Mom, are you sure it's the right Dan Johnson? She said, she started reading off the article and I could hear her through the phone. And she said, yeah, Dan Johnson, accused of molesting a 17-year-old, killed himself. And I was like, oh my God, no. And I just burst into tears and literally like fell onto the ground because I was so emotional and I just lost it. And I don't know, I just started going crazy. Like my mind just started going everywhere, like everything. I just started thinking about Sarah and I just thought about the family, and I was very upset for them because they might hate me right now, which is okay. I mean, I understand. I wouldn't know how I would feel if I was in their situation, but I've always loved and cared for them. And so, so once I found out, it was pretty devastating.
The very next day, Rebecca Johnson was back in the Heart of Fire Church, giving interviews to local TV stations.
The media has been bullying people, and it's not right. They just attacked him. They harassed him from the day he went into office. He was followed, dogged. He did not get a fair shake.
She sent out a press release calling her husband's death a high-tech lynching, and she made an announcement. She would run to fill her husband's seat in the state legislature.
I really want to finish my husband's term. I just want to finish what he started.
Before Rebecca Johnson could focus on her campaign full-time, she had to help put together her husband's funeral. It was held on Monday, December 18th. Only one media outlet was allowed inside the church, WDRB, Louisville's local Fox affiliate, which had provided the Johnsons with favorable coverage in the past. The video WDRB posted later showed that the service was more than an hour long. It was a mixture of music and people giving eulogies. Dan Johnson's parents were there, from Bastrop, Louisiana. The last eulogy was given by a man named George Augustus Stallings. He was introduced as Johnson's twin brother, which drew laughs because Stallings is black.
Surprise! Peace be with you. Thank you. What can I say? Amen. What can I say that my twin brother from another mother?
Stallings is a former priest. He was accused of sexually abusing altar boys in the 1980s, and in 1990, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church for starting his own independent church. He denied the accusations, but his archdiocese later settled a lawsuit with one of his accusers for $125,000. No criminal charges were ever filed against Stallings related to the allegations.
Danny Ray Johnson's life was not lived in vain. It was lived in love, it was lived in service, and God has received his soul and said, well done. I want us to stand to our feet and give God the praise
When the funeral ended, a convoy of motorcycles accompanied Danny Ray Johnson's body to the Mount Washington Cemetery, where he was buried later that day. Rebecca Johnson rode on the back of one of them. And then she turned her attention to winning her husband's seat. A special election was set for February 20, and the Bullitt County GOP picked Rebecca Johnson as their candidate. Her opponent, Democrat Linda Belcher. You might remember Belcher. She ran against Danny Ray Johnson in the November 2016 election.
Blind Linda Lou. I had someone tell me the other night the reason her feet are red, her shoes are red, is all the blood of all those babies. She's killed over 80,000 babies in just Kentucky.
Belcher succeeded her late husband, Larry, and served 3 terms before losing to Johnson. Unlike her husband's 2016 campaign, Rebecca Johnson's wasn't centered on attacking Linda Belcher. She did door-to-door canvassing and meet and greets at local bars. She sent out mailers and posted yard signs. She ran on a campaign promise to reform Kentucky's public pension system. She favored legalizing marijuana. She was pro-gun and anti-abortion. But like the Pope, she also expressed right-wing, racist, and homophobic views on Facebook, in her case, before becoming a candidate. She's made posts dismissing transgender rights, Muslims, and immigrants. And she shares his habit of exaggerating.
I am a professional woman. I've worked at the airport years ago before I married my husband. I had hundreds of employees.
But the president of the aviation company where she worked said it was more like 24. He did, however, describe Rebecca Johnson as a valued employee. Rebecca Johnson has also struggled with financial and legal issues over the past 30 years. Bankruptcy, bounced checks, unpaid bills, and income tax troubles. Most recently, the Johnsons failed to pay property taxes on time for 9 years stretching back to 2003, racking up several $1,000s in penalties. Rebecca Johnson ignored numerous requests from us for an interview. Belcher, her opponent, spent her career in the Bullitt County public school system, working as a teacher, a principal, and director of transportation. Here's some of what she said at a candidates forum 3 weeks before the election.
I really know Bullitt County, and I know their needs. Right now, roads is a big one. Of course, the opioid crisis, infrastructure. We want to continue to support our schools. So there are a lot of things like that that just need to be looked at.
Johnson wasn't at that forum. She didn't attend any election events where Belcher would be. As the polls closed on the special election, Democrat Linda Belcher and supporters gathered at her campaign headquarters in Shepherdsville. Johnson, the Republican, planned to meet her supporters at a bar across the county. The election had gotten a lot of attention, but voter turnout was low. The district has 31,000 registered voters, but fewer than 5,000 went to the polls. And more than 2/3 of them voted for Linda Belcher. Belcher celebrated and promised to shed the political party identity when she gets in office.
I am a Bullitt County, and I'm going to work for all Bullitt Countyans.
Across the county, 20 or so Johnson supporters watched the results on TV. Johnson had invited them to be there, but she never showed up. So we never got to hear from her.
Rebecca Johnson won't replace her husband in Frankfort, for now at least, but the controversy isn't over either. She alleged voter fraud in a Facebook post a few hours after the polls closed, but the county clerk dismissed that. The state's attorney general's voter fraud hotline received just one baseless complaint. Belcher's victory means she'll serve out the rest of what would have been Danny Ray Johnson's term. Rebecca Johnson's already gearing up for the May primary. If she wins, she'll face Belcher in the general election. So this story isn't over yet. And even though Rebecca Johnson won't fill her late husband's seat in the State House immediately, she's already continuing his legacy behind the pulpit at Heart of Fire.
I'm standing up strong. I'm not bowing down. I'm not backing up. I have to go forward. I gotta finish this virginity. I'm not giving
The Pope's Long Con was originally reported by Jake Ryan and R.G. Dunlop and produced by Laura Ellis. Chapter 6 was edited by Stephen George, Erica Peterson, and Kate Howard. We had additional assistance from Sean Cannon, Eleanor Klibanoff, Tara Anderson, and Brendan McCarthy. Music by Kevin Ratterman. If you want to support nonprofit journalism and more work like this, visit kycir.org. You can also read this story there with lots of extras. This has been The Pope's Long Con from the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting and Louisville Public Media. Thanks for listening.